you are alone right now. Maybe you're in your room, like maybe you're on a bus, maybe there's noise around you, but inside your head there's a specific kind of quiet that happens when you stop performing and just exist for a second. And now imagine that quiet, but with no walls around it, no ceiling, no floor. It's just open land in every direction, a sky so full of stars. It has weight and the sound of something moving in the dark that you cannot see. You have no word for what you're feeling. You have no framework for it. You have no religion, no philosophy, no science, no one who has ever written down an explanation for why the sky exists or why you are standing underneath it. You just have the feeling. And the feeling is enormous. That feeling, that specific collision between the human brain and a universe too large to process, is where this story begins. Not with churches, not with prophets, not with scripture or ritual or organized belief. With that moment, a human being alone under the sky, feeling something so large, they had to invent a container for it. Archaeologists call the evidence of that moment the oldest religious behavior in the human record. And the oldest evidence we have is not a temple. It is not a statue. It is not a prayer. It is a grave. A Neanderthal burial site in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, approximately 60,000 years ago. A body placed carefully on its side. Pollen from 8 different species of flowering plants found in the soil around the bones. Evidence contested but persistent that someone put flowers on that body before they covered it. Think about what that requires. To bury someone with flowers, you have to believe that the act means something. You have to believe that the dead person is somewhere that the gesture can reach. You have to have somewhere inside you a model of the world in which death is not simply an ending, in which something continues or should continue or must continue. That is not instinct. No other animal does this. A wolf does not bury its pack members with wildflowers. A crow will mourn, will sit beside a dead crow and call out, but it does not place objects on the body as offerings to something it cannot see. Only humans do this. And the question that keeps archaeologists and neuroscientists and philosophers arguing across centuries is the same question you are now sitting with. Why? Why did the human brain, a survival machine, a pattern recognition engine built by 4 million years of evolution to find food and avoid predators and reproduce, why did that brain invent God? Not one God, not a specific God, but the concept itself, the idea that behind the visible world, there is an invisible one, that behind the events of a human life, there is something that intends them, that the universe is not indifferent. That idea, in some form in every culture, on every continent, across every era of recorded human history, that idea is universal. There has never been a human society discovered that had no form of spiritual belief, not one. Anthropologists have cataloged thousands of cultures, and every single one of them, without exception, had some version of the invisible world, some version of forces or beings or energies that operated behind the surface of things. That is not a coincidence. That is a feature. The human brain did not accidentally stumble into religion the way it stumbled into agriculture or metallurgy. Religion is not a technology. It is not something humans invented and then that's passed on and refined. It is something the brain generates automatically, inevitably, under the right conditions, and those conditions are very specific. They are the conditions of being human, of being the only animal that knows it is going to die, of being the only animal that can imagine its own absence, of being the only animal that watches the people it loves disappear and has to continue living inside that knowledge. The brain that can do all of those things, that level of self-awareness, that capacity for abstract thought, that ability to model the future and understand loss before it happens, that brain has a cost. The cost is existential terror. And God, in the broadest sense of the word, before any specific religion, before any specific name, God was the answer to that terror. Not a lie, not a delusion, not a primitive mistake that science has now corrected. An answer, the first answer, the most durable answer in the entire history of the human species. This is the story of how that answer was built. The human brain is a prediction machine. That is not a metaphor. That is literally what it does all day, every second you are conscious. It takes incoming data from your senses and it runs that data against a model of the world it has built from everything you have ever experienced, and it predicts what is about to happen next. This system is extraordinarily good at its job. It is why you can catch a ball thrown at your face before your conscious mind has registered that something is moving toward you. It is why you flinch at a loud noise before you have identified what made it. The prediction runs faster than awareness, but this system has a specific vulnerability, and that vulnerability is randomness. When the brain encounters an event it cannot predict, when something happens that does not fit any pattern it has stored, it does not simply register the event as random and move on. It searches for a cause, compulsively, automatically. It cannot help itself. Psychologists call this agency detection. The technical term is hyperactive agency detection device, or HADD, and it means the human brain is specifically wired to find intentional agents behind events, to assume that things happen because something caused them on purpose. This was an extraordinarily useful feature for a predator-rich environment. If you are a human on an open savanna 200,000 years ago, and you hear a sound in the grass, the correct response is not to reason carefully about whether it was wind or a lion. The correct response is to assume intent, to assume something is there, and to run. The cost of a false positive is minimal. The cost of a false negative is death. So the brain evolved to over-detect agents, to see faces in clouds, to hear voices in wind, to attribute the storm to anger, the drought to punishment, the earthquake to intention. This is not stupidity. This is a survival strategy that worked for hundreds of thousands of years, but it has a consequence. When you combine agency detection with the human capacity for abstract thought, the ability to model things you cannot see, forces that operate beyond the visible world, then you get something inevitable. You get gods, not a specific god, not a theology, not a religion with rules and texts and priests, just the raw cognitive output of a brain doing exactly what it was built to do, finding the agent behind the event, locating the intention behind the pattern, giving a face to the force. There's a study from the University of Texas that placed participants in front of a screen showing two triangles and a circle moving around each other. The movements were random, generated by a computer with no narrative logic whatsoever. Participants were asked to describe what they saw. Almost none of them said two triangles and a circle moving randomly. They said the big triangle was chasing the small triangle. The circle was trying to escape. The big triangle was angry. The small triangle was scared. They invented a story. They invented intention. They invented emotional states for geometric shapes on a screen. That is agency detection in action. And that cognitive reflex, applied not to triangles on a screen, but to thunder, to drought, to disease, to death, is the neurological foundation of every religion that has ever existed. The brain did not choose to believe. It did not decide to invent the supernatural. It simply did what it was built to do in an environment where the most important question a human being could ask was not what happened, but who made it happen. The oldest evidence of religious behavior is not a temple. It is not a statue, or a carved idol, or a written prayer. It is something much simpler and much more devastating in its implications. It is the way the dead were treated. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, archaeologists excavated the remains of a Neanderthal who died approximately 60,000 years ago. The body had been placed on its side in a deliberate position. Around the bones, researchers found concentrated clusters of pollen from 8 different flowering plant species. Wildflowers that had to have been placed there intentionally because the cave's sediment patterns ruled out natural accumulation. Someone carried flowers to a grave 60,000 years ago. The debate about Shanidar continues. Some researchers argue the pollen could have been carried by rodents or wind, but the positionality of the burial itself is not contested. The body was placed, not abandoned, not left where death occurred, carried, arranged, and covered. And that act alone, the decision to treat a dead body as something that mattered, to give it a specific place, to mark its absence, requires a cognitive framework that goes far beyond anything observed in any other species. It requires a belief that death is not simply an ending. Then, 45,000 years ago, something happened in the archaeological record that researchers call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. In caves across Europe and Asia, humans began making art, not crude markings, not accidental scratches. Deliberate, detailed, compositionally sophisticated paintings of animals, the bison, horses, deer, mammoths, rendered with anatomical accuracy and a sense of movement that suggests the artists had been observing these animals for a very long time and had something specific they wanted to say about them. The cave at Lascaux in France contains over 600 painted figures. The cave at Chauvet contains paintings of lions and rhinoceroses created with shading techniques that would not appear again in Western art for 30,000 years. These were not decorations. Archaeologists know this because most of the paintings are located in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, chambers that required crawling through narrow passages in complete darkness to reach. They were not made to be seen casually. They were made for a specific purpose, in a specific place, under specific conditions. The leading interpretation is ritual, that these chambers were sanctuaries, places where humans went to perform acts of communication with something they believed existed beyond the visible world. And then, 11,600 years ago, before the invention of agriculture, before the first permanent settlements, before any of the infrastructure we associate with organized civilization, a group of hunter-gatherers in what is now southeastern Turkey built something, Göbekli Tepe, a complex of carved stone pillars, some weighing 20 tons, arranged in precise circular patterns across a hilltop. The pillars are covered in detailed reliefs of animals, foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, carved with technical sophistication that required tools, planning, and a coordinated labor force. Archaeologists estimate it took hundreds of people working together over decades to build it. There was no city nearby, no agriculture to sustain a population, no economic system to organize the labor. The only thing that could have brought that many people together, fed them, organized them, and motivated them to carve 20-ton stones on a hilltop was belief. Göbekli Tepe did not come after civilization. It came before it. And the implication, which archaeologist Klaus Schmidt spent 20 years arguing before his death, is that religion did not emerge from civilization. Civilization emerged from religion. The need to gather, to build, to maintain a sacred space. That need created the organizational structures that eventually became cities, agriculture, and everything that followed. The temple was not the product of society. Society was the product of the temple. There is a problem with large groups of humans. For most of our evolutionary history, humans lived in bands of 15 to 50 individuals. At that scale, cooperation is relatively straightforward. You know everyone. You can track who contributes and who defects. Reputation is visible and immediate. The system enforces itself. But around 10,000 years ago, human groups started getting bigger. Agriculture meant that staying in one place made sense. Staying in one place meant populations grew, and suddenly humans were living in groups of hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands, with strangers, people they had never met, people whose reputation they could not track, people who could defect from cooperation and disappear into the crowd. This is what evolutionary biologists call the cooperation problem. And it is genuinely difficult because the rational move when you cannot monitor everyone is to exploit the system before someone exploits you. And when everyone thinks that way, the system collapses. Like every large-scale human society that has ever existed has had to solve this problem. And almost all of them solved it the same way, with a God who watches. The specific details vary enormously, and the name, the form, the rules, the rituals, but the functional structure is almost universal. A supernatural agent who is present everywhere, who sees what you do even when no one else is watching, who tracks your behavior and holds you accountable across time. Psychologist Ara Norenzayan at the University of British Columbia calls this the big gods hypothesis. His research across dozens of cultures found a consistent pattern. Societies with moralizing gods, gods who care about human behavior and punish violations are significantly better at large-scale cooperation than societies without them. In experimental games designed to test cooperation between strangers, participants who had been primed to think about a watchful god contributed more to public goods, cheated less, and cooperated more consistently with strangers, even when there was no material incentive to do so. The god was not watching. But the belief that the god was watching changed behavior in measurable, consistent ways. This is not manipulation. This is a cognitive technology for solving a problem that human social architecture could not solve any other way. The brain that generates agents behind events, that same agency detection system, generated an agent that was always present, always observing, and whose judgment could not be avoided. And that agent made it possible to trust strangers, to build cities, to organize armies, to create legal systems based on oath-taking, to conduct trade across distances too large for reputation to travel. Every institution that holds large human societies together, courts, contracts, governments, currencies, is built on a foundation of trust between people who have never met and cannot directly monitor each other. Religion was the first technology that made that trust possible at scale. It was not an accident, it was not a mistake. It was a solution, imperfect, costly, sometimes catastrophically misused, but a solution to a real problem that nothing else in the human toolkit could address. So here is where we are. The human brain is wired to detect agents behind events. That wiring produced the raw material of religious experience, the sense that something is there, that something intends, that the universe is not indifferent. That cognitive system ran for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone wrote down a theology. The archaeological record shows that humans were burying their dead with ritual care 60,000 years ago, painting sacred chambers 45,000 years ago, and building stone temples 11,600 years ago, before agriculture, before writing, before anything we typically call civilization. And the social science shows that the belief systems built on that neurological foundation solved a real problem, the cooperation problem, in a way that made large-scale human society possible. None of this tells you whether any specific religion is true. That is a different question, and it is not the question this video asked. The question this video asked was, why did the human brain invent God? And the answer is that it did not invent God the way it invented the wheel or the alphabet as a deliberate solution to a recognized problem. It invented God the way it invented language, inevitably, automatically, as the natural output of a mind shaped by millions of years of evolution, trying to survive in a world it did not fully understand. The brain that could ask why is the same brain that needed an answer. And in the absence of any answer, in the dark, under a sky too vast to process, beside a body that was there and then was not, the brain did what it always does. It found the agent. It named the intention. It built a framework large enough to hold the question. We have been doing it ever since. Every candle lit in a church, every prayer spoken into silence, every ritual performed at the edge of something too large to face alone. These are the same cognitive reflex that made a Neanderthal carry flowers to a grave 60,000 years ago. Not stupidity, not primitive confusion, not something we evolved past, something we are still doing, because the sky is still vast, and the questions are still the same. And the brain that looks up at the dark and needs to know why, that brain has not changed at all.